I've met the man of my life. My father, he's trying to warn me that it's a trap. This guy's really up to no good, and he's probably just using me because we're a really wealthy family, but I think it's all baloney. I know true love when I see it, and I'm going to prove to my father that what I have is love. I'm the only child of my father. He was never really married as he enjoyed the life of a chronic womanizer. Dad sponsored his lifestyle from the custom furniture business that he owns, which is worth around $8 million. You heard that right. His idea about marriage, women, and the relationship was somewhat twisted. He felt men should not trust women to the point of getting married to them and entrusting their lives and wealth to these women. From what I gathered, he had this mentality ever since he was a teenager, and that's why he never actually married. I'm just the product of a lady who tried but failed to pin him down with marriage. I finished school and began working in my father's firm. My father was not retired, but he quickly brought me into the managerial affairs of the company, though he oversaw everything that went on there. It was during my second year of working at my father's firm that I met my would-be husband, Richard. Richard was a 30-year-old guy who was equally the only child of his parents. Well, his father had died while he was still a toddler, so his mother had to raise him from the interior design firm, which her husband left behind. The death of Richard's father affected the business and his mother, who had actually no prior knowledge or experience in managing business and had no other option than to step in and see how she could rescue the business. The business survived all throughout the years, but it could be better. Richard and his mom decided to partner with my father's company, and that was how we met. A customer-made furniture company and an interior design firm could get into a profitable partnership, but the thing was that other interested parties equally wanted a partnership with our firm at the time. My father even promised, and I mean promised, Richard and his mom that we would get back to them after considering the options that we had on the table, and Richard's mom noted that Richard was going to keep in touch. I now understand the statement to be a part of her grand scheme to get Richard and me close. So, I received a call from Richard just 3 days after they visited us, and it was too soon because Father noted his feedback would come in about 2 months, since they were at the end of a very long list. I told Richard that it was way too soon to expect a reply, and he noted that he was not calling me about the partnership, he was calling because of me. Well, anyways, I guess you could say, long story short, he wanted to take me out. I initially played hard to get, but you know what? I finally gave in. Saying Richard was sweet is an understatement. He knew his game very well, how to turn a woman's head, and coupled with the fact that he was very, very handsome, I quickly fell for him like a pack of cards. We began dating, but I kept it a secret from my dad, as I did not know what he would make of it. Well, my dad got wind of the whole thing when I had flowers sent to me at my workplace. My father observed it and learned from the staff that it was for me. So, my father asked me, and I told him the truth. My father was not pleased with me. He noted that my relationship with Richard was wrong on so many reasons, but the only reason he gave was that Richard and his mom were prospective clients, and it was not ideal to engage in a relationship with him. So I asked my dad why he had said it was not ideal and said the whole relationship thing was probably just a ploy on Richard's part and his mother to win our hearts and influence our design. You know, as regards to their job proposition. My father asked me to not doubt his opinion on the matter because he was a player and it was all part of the game. My father then asked me to end the relationship with Richard, as it was only going to turn to be parasitic, since I was being played like a fiddle. I can say that it was a pretty tough decision. Yeah, it was. But I decided I was going to do it either way, so I called Richard and noted that I wanted us to meet. Richard said that he could not see me for the next 3 days. It was odd because ever since we started to date, Richard always wanted to see me. He had said that if it were possible, he would hang me around his neck like a trophy and take me wherever he went. So this was why I found it odd he did not jump at the opportunity to meet up with me. Well, what I did know was that he was planning to take the whole thing to the next level, and that's why he asked that we meet in 3 days and not a second sooner. He fixed our meeting at a very expensive restaurant, and when I got there, it turned out that he had booked the entire space for just the two of us. It was sweet, and though I loved the gesture, I felt bad because I was just going to break up with him right there. I told Richard that I wanted to discuss something very, very important with him, and though he noted that I would have the opportunity to speak, he wanted me to first listen to what he had to say. Richard gave the most romantic proposal you could ever imagine. It turned out that even the folks who had served us were his friends, and they all cheered and chanted, "Say yes, say yes," as Richard, who was on one knee, awaited for my reply. I didn't know what to do. Right before my eyes was the most handsome, sweetest man I've ever met, and I immediately forgot my father and the reason why I was there. Besides, I could not say no to Richard and embarrass him in front of his friends, who were videoing the whole thing, so I said yes. Richard later asked what it was I wanted to tell him, but I told him that it did not matter anymore. It was a memorable evening, but I knew that I would have to face my father once I got home. So I get to the house where my dad was just simply waiting for me. He noted that I've taken longer than usual and asked me how it went. I told my father I could not do it as a matter of a fact. We were currently engaged. My father laughed hard and said, "This guy has eaten deep into you." He called Richard a very good player for getting me engaged when I was supposed to break up with him. So, my father, however, noted that it was not still late to get things situated right. He said that since I was not yet married to Richard, I could still call off the engagement. I was in love, and I unexpectedly revolted against my father. How could he be asking me to break off an engagement on the very evening that I said yes? My father knew I was in the moment, and so he said that we would put Richard through the acid test. What he called the acid test was a move to prove that Richard had an ulterior motive and simply did not genuinely love me. I told him, you know what, that's okay by me. If Richard passed the test, then it was to my father's shame, but if he failed, I was ready to face the pain and move on. Richard came to officially meet my father to ask for my hand in marriage. He told my father that he knew I was the one for him from the first day that we met. After listening to him, guys, my father told him that he had no issue with our relationship and was willing to give him my hand in marriage. My father then told him that he had to go through the proposal which he and his mother had submitted, but his company would not be partnering with him, as he had already chosen another. I expected Richard's countenance to change and all, but you know what? It did not. He remained calm and just kept smiling, and he told my father that it was all right and that by giving his consent to our relationship, my father had done more than enough. So, Richard left our home shortly after, and we agreed to start making the wedding plan soon enough. The moment that he left the house, I went to my father to rub it on him that Richard's interest in marriage did not wane, and so he was wrong about him, but my father shockingly noted that I was to call off the engagement with Richard as soon as possible. Well, obviously, I was confused, because by my estimation, Richard had passed the acid test with flying colors. I asked my father what his reason was, and he said that Richard was even more manipulative than we thought. According to Dad, the fact that Richard's countenance did not show any form of disappointment upon hearing that there would no longer be a partnership between us showed that he was a master manipulator who was capable of hiding all of his emotions. Well, I could not see what my father saw, so I refused. I told my dad that I was going to get married to Richard even if he was completely against it. So, my father did not argue. He simply told me that it was my decision and I would be the one to live with all the consequences. So, Richard and I got married 2 months later at a lavish wedding that his mother organized. I had wanted supported financially, but Richard insisted that he would cover the wedding cost. Richard already had a home of his own, but he had their firm redesign the whole house according to my taste. We settled very nicely into a life as a married couple. But something came up about 3 months later. I overheard Richard talking with someone over the phone, and I could tell the details of whatever he discussed upset him. I asked what it was, but he simply said that I should not bother. I tried letting the whole thing die down, but I could not because it affected my husband's demeanor and ultimately angered me, and it messed up our marriage a bit. I did not have peace. How could I when my husband was in such distress? I even wondered if I was the problem, and I finally got him to talk, and he told me that it had to do with the interior design company which his father left behind. He said that it was struggling, and if nothing was done, it could likely fold very soon. The way he put the whole thing touched me, and he said he did not want his inheritance to be lost. Well, obviously, I can't just sit back and just do nothing. A partnership with my father's company could help save my husband, so I promised to talk to my father, even though my father had refused a partnership. I got to work the next day and asked my father for the audience. I told him about the situation on the ground and how it was affecting my marriage. I pleaded with him to facilitate a partnership between our company and that of Richard and his family. My father looked at me for a few seconds, and I knew he was probably thinking I was being played. My dad asked me if Richard or his mom had put me up to making that request. I told him that neither my husband nor his mother was behind it. I explained to him how my husband had even refused to let me in on what was going on. My father shook his head and warned me to be careful. He said he could deduce from my explanation that my husband had staged the whole thing, as he knew full well that I would be absolutely disturbed, and do my best to convince him of a partnership. My father said my husband and his mom were probably manipulating me via my emotions, before going on to restate that he would not be getting into any partnership with my husband or his late father's company. I got home that evening to find my mother-in-law with Richard, and they were discussing the situation of things with their company. Watching them agonize over everything made it difficult for me to tell Richard that his father-in-law, who was in a position to help him, had refused, but I still had to. Richard noted that it was all right, and my mother-in-law even thanked me for trying. I then asked if there was some other way that we could rescue the dying company, and my mother-in-law noted that it would require lots and lots of money. The idea was to pay social media influencers who would then advertise the firm for a prolonged period of time. I went straight to the bank the next day and made a transfer of $30,000 to my husband's account, who then alerted his mom. I promised to be giving money every month to support the advertisement, and this was me trying to be a supportive wife and a daughter-in-law. I continued working on my father, even though I was not happy that he refused to help me and my husband. Something happened shortly after that, though. A lady walked up to the company and began walking straight to my father's office. The secretary stopped her halfway and asked who she was and what was her business inside of the office. The lady, who goes by the name Priscilla, said that she was there to see my father, and she even claimed that he was around because his car was parked out there. The secretary asked her if she had an appointment, but Miss Priscilla said she did not need one. And without paying any more attention to what the secretary was saying, she turned and made a very obvious direction towards my father's office. The secretary stopped, and the argument just ensued. It was so loud that everyone was immediately drawn to the scene. The secretary tried to explain to us what transpired, but the lady just called her names and threatened to even get her fired. Guys, I was actually stunned by the audacity of this lady, who could even threaten to have my father's secretary fired. I mean, what? It was clear that she could only say so if she had my father under her control. My father's door suddenly flung open, and he asked the secretary to let the lady come inside. Miss Priscilla gave the lady a degrading look before walking into my father's office with footsteps that spoke of entitlement. My father's door was shut once the lady was inside, and though everybody just went ahead to resume their job, we could hear the both of them arguing. The lady stormed out of my father's house within 5 minutes, and you could see the bitterness written all over her face. My suspicions were correct. She was one of my father's mistresses, and I never saw that lady again until almost a year later when she showed up at the same office with the boy whom she claimed was my father's son. We did not know what she had discussed with my father, but she did not leave the way she did during the first visit. It was after she left that my father called me into his office to give me a proper update on exactly what's going on. My dad even admitted that he had something to do with Priscilla in the past.
He went on to go ahead and tell me that she had not only claimed the child was his, but demanded he rewrote his will to incorporate the boy inside of it. She was equally demanding a huge child support monthly payment as well, and my father began accusing Priscilla of being opportunistic and wanting to take advantage of the situation just to try to milk him dry. As for me, I was not angry or disappointed. I suggested that my father ran a DNA test on him and make sure that he was his son. Then he had to take proper care of both mother and child. I mean, the boy was going to be my brother after all, if the DNA test came back to be positive, of course. I shared the news with my husband, who informed his mother. She showed up at our home 3 days ago and asked me to not let Priscilla, whom she tagged a gold digger, come and take what is rightfully mine. From the way she spoke, I could tell that she was very much acquainted with the gimmicks that ladies use and milking money out of me, and it made me remember for a split second what my father had been saying about her, and my husband. We were still talking when I got a call from my father's doctor. My father was involved in an accident, and he's currently admitted to the hospital. The doctors called my father a fighter because according to them, he was as good as dead. He is in a coma, though. Now, I've told you everything there is about the context, and the reason I'm even telling you all this is because I don't know how to handle this. Priscilla, when my father is out of a coma this time, what should I do? Update number 1. My father's situation meant that I had to take up a leadership position in the firm. It was not an easy job at all, as I had to carefully think through my decision that I was going to make as though it was my father making them. He would not spend the rest of his life in a hospital, and when he does come back, I want him to find the company in a better shape than he left it. This would prove to him that I was more than capable of actually just running things. So, I was at the office last week when Priscilla showed up with an entitlement attitude. She walked inside of my office without waiting for the secretary to announce her presence, and I would not take that if it were coming from someone else, but I made an exception for her because of what exactly has been going on. Priscilla had an envelope in her hand, and she threw it at the table. So I asked her what it is, and she said that it's proof that her son was my younger brother. It was good news for me. I assured Priscilla that she and my brother would be taken care of well, but she had to hold on till my father was strong enough to deal with the issue. Priscilla demanded a certain sum of money, which she claimed my father had promised to give her for the upkeep of her and her son, my baby brother. And though her attitude did not help matters, I was willing to overlook her just for the sake of my bro. I made a transfer to her account right then and there, and she left without even saying thank you. My father, he came out of the coma a few weeks later, and I went to see him. He asked how things were, and I noted that the company was in great shape. I simply did not tell him about the DNA results, though, because I felt that he was going to be better dealing with the situation when he left the hospital. I was still with my father when Priscilla walked in with her son. I guess she must have been keeping tabs on my dad to discover that he had regained consciousness. Priscilla did not bother greeting me. She just attempted to place the child on my dad's lap, but I stopped her. My dad was not strong enough for that, and Priscilla warned me to not get in her way as she simply wanted my father to hold his son. My father looked at me, and I confirmed what Priscilla was insinuating, that the boy was his son. Priscilla immediately told me to call his lawyer and start making preparations, guys, to rewrite his will and include his son. I think that was just seriously way too insensitive, so I rebuked Priscilla for just thinking about what she stood to gain, and she said I had no right to talk to her like that because her son was a legitimate child of my father and had just as many rights as I did. Well, I wasn't going to take that. I reminded her that she might have given my father a son and me a brother, but she was only a baby mama, nothing more. Well, Priscilla and I fell into a heated argument, and my father had to scream at the top of his lungs to stop us from causing commotions. The nurse rushed to the scene, and the both of us were ushered out of the hospital so my father could rest. Now, this is the situation, and I think I've made a mistake by getting Priscilla to transfer some money to herself before, 'cause I should have waited for Dad to make his decision about Priscilla and the kid. Ugh, I think I'm doomed. Update number 2. My husband Richard had been supportive ever since the whole episode with my father's baby mama came up. He informed his mother about it and she visited me in the office the other day. We spent quality time just talking and told her how Priscilla had been in panic and just a straight up pain in my neck. My mother-in-law and I were still talking about Priscilla when that jerk walked through the door. Priscilla did not even greet anybody. She was okay, I guess, but she ignored my mother-in-law. She simply told me that she had not received the credit alert of the weekly amount of money she was supposed to get for the upkeep of both her and her son. My mother-in-law immediately asked me not to give a dime to her, as she's not entitled to it. My father has been officially mandated by the law to start paying child support, and even if he was, then she would wait for him to come out of the hospital, and you know what? I stood firm on what my mother-in-law noted, and I told Priscilla that I was not going to give her any money. So, I just called security to get her kicked out. And I asked her to go and meet my father at the hospital, of course. It was not possible, though, because my father had instructed the personnel not to let her into the building. Priscilla was dragged out of the building, and she promised that I had not seen the last of her. So I appreciate the fact that my mother-in-law was present at my office that day. I got home, and my husband had already cooked dinner. He gave me a nice treat to help ease the stress, and I had some stress, and it's still going on. We sat down later that night, and I told him everything that happened. He listened attentively to me and comforted me by saying everything was going to be okay. The night was going well till he brought up an issue that was really out of place. Richard said that since I was now in the leadership position at my father's firm, I could now make possible the partnership which he had sought ever since before we've been married. The statement took sleep out of my eyes. Could it be that he patiently waited for a favorable situation as this which he could capitalize to push the partnership? Could he be the master manipulator which my father urged me to be? I was disappointed the more I thought about it. How could my husband be aiming for a partnership at a time like this? I don't know, guys. I wanted to rebuke him for being insensitive, but I did go ahead to decide against it. If he was a master manipulator, then I would let it show. I told him, simple and straight up, that I could not make the decision as my father, who had just regained consciousness, would be coming back soon, and I would not want to upset his health by taking a decision that he would not approve of. So, Richard just said it was all right, but I could sense the disappointment deep inside of his voice. I just hope that we were both on the same side because I already have an antagonist in the person of Priscilla. I wouldn't even want to imagine my husband had ulterior motives towards me. Update number 3. My dad is dead and buried. I'm more heartbroken than you can imagine. He was doing fine till the doctors noticed a complication with his vital organs. My father's death touched me, and I would have broken down if not for the fact that my husband and his mother were both beside me every single step of the way. I wanted to postpone the burial of my father till I was emotionally strong enough to do so, but they convinced me that it was best to bury him and just go ahead and grieve. Everything happened smoothly, and my father was laid to rest. Priscilla showed up on the day of the funeral and asked when the will would be read. She could not just wait for my father to be buried before she showed everyone that she was after his money. I told her the date had not been fixed, but I would get in touch with my lawyer and then get back to her if her presence was needed. Priscilla said that she hoped my father had rewritten his will, otherwise she was ready to contest it in court if her son was not included in the inheritance. I was not in a really good mood, so I didn't want to argue, so I tried ignoring her, but she would not allow that. She said that she would be moving into my father's house with my younger brother, since I already have a home where I live with my husband. So, I immediately promised to get her arrested. That's right, if she so much as stepped foot onto that premises, and I meant it. My mother-in-law had already risen on my behalf, and she ordered Priscilla to leave. So, Priscilla looked at my mother-in-law from her head down to her toes and sighed and called my mother-in-law my little lapdog. Well, okay. My mother-in-law, upon hearing Priscilla take her as a dog, decided to attack her like one and fight. I did not like the fact that my mother-in-law straight up degraded herself to fighting someone that she was old enough to have given birth to, but I loved the fact that she gave Priscilla a nice beating. My mother-in-law fought like she had known Priscilla for a long while, equally bore grudges against her, and Richard separated the fight of the two ladies and called themselves names as Priscilla was thrown out. The reading of the wills tomorrow, and my father's lawyer noted that my father had made some adjustments to his will right before he passed away. I don't have the energy to bear this drama with Priscilla, and on top of it all, my husband and mother-in-law are giving me this vibe that it's proving that my father was somehow correct. Although, I can't make assumptions like this so carelessly, can I? Update number 4. My father's will has been read, and guys, I'm currently staying at his home. What about my husband's house, you might ask? Well, I would soon be officially divorced from him anyways. I know it's a lot for you to take in, but it was so much for me to take in as well. If my father was alive, he would be saying something like, "Ha, I told you so, told you so." The whole thing started, or rather escalated, on the day which the will was supposed to be read. My mother-in-law had come over to our home, and she even wanted to accompany me to the lawyer's office, but I turned her down. Richard, on his part, was all too excited about it. While helping me prepare, he simply asked me to not bother, as he was certain my father, whom he considered wise, would have handed over his company to me and not to his gold-digging baby mama. I eased up and thanked him for being supportive. He then said that by the end of the day, I would be in the position to now start making decisions regarding the company without having to look over my shoulder to see what my father even thought about it. According to him, we would at least have the partnership, which we had wanted all this while. Richard's mom supported his statement, and I became very skeptical about their love for me. I got to the place where Priscilla and the lawyers were already seated. Upon my arrival, the lawyer went straight to business for the day. The lawyer noted that my father had indeed altered his will, but the changes were not very much. Everything was committed into my hands. The only difference between the initial will was that now he created a trust fund for my baby brother, but I, not his mother, was to oversee it, and he would own 10% stake in the company when he turned 25. This was a long time from now, obviously. So after we listened to it, Priscilla promised to contest it in court, and I knew it's because it hurt her that she could not lay hold of anything presently. The lawyer assured me that she did not stand a chance of winning her case in court. I went straight home where my husband and his mother were anxiously waiting for me. Richard came to greet me outside and asked how it had gone. I lied that my father had willed the company to my younger brother and even given the house to his baby mama. She was to assume the managerial role of the company till my younger brother turned 18 years of age. I told Richard that I was not bothered because I had got him and his mom. I just lied to see my husband's reaction, and you know what, guys? It came as an absolute shock. He turned and began walking inside the house. I asked what the issue was, and he said he could no longer continue with this marriage. Why was it coming after I told him I did not have an inheritance? I followed him inside where his mother was waiting, and immediately she saw me. She asked if I've gotten my inheritance, but rather than answer her, I told her what Richard had just said. She asked me to ignore him and went ahead to ask the same question again. Well, I gave the same answer I'd given when Richard asked. I simply made sure to mention that I was not at all bothered because she was on my side. My mother-in-law's smiley countenance immediately changed. She gave me a dirty slap and said that if her son wanted a divorce, then I should sign the papers and get the heck out of his life. I was in shock because the only reason they had befriended me was because they had their sights set on the company. I asked her, how could they do this to me after everything I've done for them? And my mother-in-law and husband laughed out loud and said that they've been fooling me. They never cared about me or loved me because all they wanted was a partnership and money that I could have brought to them after I married inside their home. Richard further said that he wanted to hit me that day. I refused to take the decision on my father when he was in the hospital. Now, I guess it's my turn to start laughing, guys. I told them it was nothing more than a lie, and the color from their faces drained. They tried apologizing, but I immediately took my things and left the house to go down to my father's place. So, I have initiated the divorce proceedings, and I'm equally suing my mother-in-law for assault. I'll make sure to get my money back in the form of alimony from my husband that I put into his business. I'll make sure that he doesn't get any place to advertise his company, because that's how influential my father was.
Well, it looks like the father was correct this entire time. This story was full of so many toxic people, it was driving me insane. I could see a bunch of red flags, and it looks like a lot of commenters did too. Yeah, it turns out OP's father was correct about everything. The fact that OP's husband was a gold digger, he was only after her because she had what he needed. And it was very obvious his mom was in on it too. But then we have Priscilla coming out of left field. I mean, she was extremely toxic in her own right. I want to know your thoughts on today's story, guys. So drop it down below and let's talk about, if you were in OP's position, what would you have done when you found out that your husband was no good? Let's talk about it. If you guys want daily videos, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you tomorrow. And of course, remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.